Right.
If I can look over here.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Come Boating Winter Adventure Series and tonight's presentation about Arctic Earth Adventures with David Conover. I'm Brenda Harrington, Program Librarian at the Belfast Free Library. Thank you all so much for joining us in our Zoom program room. The library is pleased to continue to co-sponsor the Winter Adventure Series with Come Boating in 2024, and we're glad that we could pivot tonight and offer this program on Zoom once the snow was no question about that. So tonight's program will be recorded and it will be available on the library's YouTube channel. I want to remind you all to please keep your mics muted throughout the program. And if you have any questions, please type them in the chat and I will read them to David at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Now I will turn the mic over to past board member Carol Kuhn for Come Boating updates, and then she will then pass the mic to Mickey Green, who will introduce tonight's speaker. So go ahead, Carol, take the mic.
Okay, thank you, Brenda, and thank you again for partnering with us. Before I get started, I would like to say a few words about Come Boating. We are a non-profit organization based in Belfast. We are an all-volunteer group whose purpose is to get people out on the water rowing, enjoying our beautiful local scenery. Come Boating shares camaraderie with a challenging exercise while strengthening our maritime heritage and our connection to the sea. With 3 Cornish gigs, which hold 6 rowers and 1 cox. The rows are available for all levels of rowers, orientation rows, community rows, exercise rows, men and women racing team, and winter rowing. And this year, we are proud to say that we are sending 3 teams to the World Gig Championship in the Isles of Scilly. The Isles of Scilly are off Cornwall, England. And the competition will be, well, let's just say, even for Belfast, the competition will be stiff. So last week, with 2 storms on Wednesday and Saturday, was a challenging time for Belfast Harbor. We asked for help for moving the gigs, and the community responded. More than 20 people showed up. Most of them were not Come Boating members at all. We thank you, Belfast, for standing by us. Like any organization, we have a budget, and we need donations. This year alone, maintenance costs over $10,000. Currently, we have about 120 members. Our annual membership is $35 for an individual and $60 at the family level. Please consider renewing your membership now and joining as a member, or just simply giving to donating to Come Boating. The donation link is on the website at comeboating.org. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. And now I'll turn it over to Mickey.
Hi, everyone. I was hoping to show a clip of Belfast coming out to help us pull the gigs last Friday. As Carol said, we were all blown away with how many people turned up. But I'm such a klutz, I can't figure out how to get my clip on this Zoom. But if you go on the Come Boating website, the Come Boating Facebook page, Our Town Belfast, we all love Belfast, all those Belfast Facebook pages, you'll see the clip there, and it's pretty daunting. It's just wonderful, amazing. So now I would like to just say a little bit about our next program, which will be in February. Zoe Quackock, another great friend of mine I've made several films with when I was living in DC. And her presentation is entitled From the Chesapeake Bay to the Bahamas and Back, How a Family of Novice, and I say novice in quotes, underlined, circled, sailors learned to navigate their first oceanic journey during a global pandemic. It might even include her describing being rescued on the way home in the middle of the Gulf Stream by the US Coast Guard. Her presentation is on February 20th and will also be totally Zoom, so be sure to register for that. And in March, we have Dan Miller of Belmont Boatworks, which we're very excited about. So it's sure to be, so be sure to be on the lookout for what well, you know, we know will be a really fun evening, and that's going to be on March 19th. And now we have David Conover. David was born and raised in a New England family with strong ties to the sea and a tradition of active storytelling. Interestingly, his parents and extended family have been the volunteer seasonal caretakers of the Curtis Island Lighthouse for the town of Camden for over 40 years. David attended Bowdoin College, and he describes his collegiate highlight as a sea semester at Williams College Mystic Seaport program, where he learned celestial navigation and completed a research project on the restoration of the Arctic schooner Bowdoin. After college, he worked as a hired sea captain and completed 2 transatlantic crossings, then 5 years as an educator at Hurricane Island Outward Bound School. He received his master's degree in education and moral development at Harvard School of Education while directing and producing his first film for National Geographic Explorer, entitled Outward Bound. In 1987, he founded the production company Compass Light Productions in Camden, focusing on science, history, and expedition films for worldwide broadcasters and clients. In 2021, David launched ArcticEarth Expeditions, a charter boat company specializing in expeditions to the Arctic. As well as we all know, the Arctic is undergoing dramatic and irreversible change, traceable to climate. What happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. The cooling Labrador current is weakening. Consequently, the neighboring Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans. This is just one of multiple vital connections between Arctic and Earth. It is my pleasure to introduce David Conover and his boat, ArcticEarth. David?
Well, thank you, Mickey, and thank you, Carol and Brenda. Bear with me 1 second here while I start my screen. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, looks good.
Good. Okay. I'd like to start with a little more context for ArcticEarth. As Mickey mentioned, most of my life I've been a filmmaker, and in that capacity, I have led a group of filmmakers at Compass Light Productions, based in Camden. We've produced a lot of films, probably hundreds of films, on the ocean, near the ocean, under the ocean, in many places, including the North. And this is a map of the North, with the Arctic Ocean and the North Pole right in the middle. Asia and Europe is on the right. North America is on the left. And hopefully we'll never get to this point where the polar ice is completely gone. But here you can see what is the Arctic Ocean directly underneath that. And yeah, the Arctic Ocean in the middle, Pacific at the top. Our home in Maine is in the lower left, over this part of the Atlantic Ocean, which is at the bottom. Over the past 35 years, these are the locations where Compass Light has filmed. As Mickey was saying, our work has been natural history, expedition, travel, culture, and science. As you can see, many of these productions are coastal, and for those, we often chartered boats. Like many working in the North, we spent a lot of time under the spell of ice, filming ice calving off tidewater glaciers, stories about glacial ice being undercut by the ocean, melting from below, melting sea ice that's seasonal. We filmed melting icebergs above the water, below the water, a lot of melting. And until a couple of years ago, it was commonly accepted that the Arctic was warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. And it also seemed, as probably some of you noticed, that just about every article about climate change has this kind of obligatory second paragraph that states that the ice of Greenland was melting. And then usually the discussion, stops at that point. In the course of our film work, had the occasion to talk with Greenlanders and a lot of folks in the north, and with scientists who were visiting Greenland. And I came to see that the ice discussion was really quite rich and nuanced, and that there were many other dimensions of change in what really was a new Arctic, an Arctic that's very unlike the old Arctic. Changing climate was part of it, but the new Arctic also had changing relationship among humans and other animals and marine life, and changes among Greenlanders, Danes, and the rest of the world, including Mainers. The old Arctic was remote and cold. The new Arctic, much more connected to the rest of the planet. For example, we filmed this ice. It's from the Cermak Kajalik, which is a glacier that flows into Disco Bay. It's also was called by the Danes Jakobshavn. It's a little bit more than halfway up the west coast of Greenland. And this one glacier drains 6.5% of the ice coming off the Greenland ice sheet. The chemistry in the top of this ice, the ice that you see here on top of these bergs, arrived from Europe via atmospheric winds, the factories of Europe, and some estimate that the top 70 feet of the Greenland ice sheet, where this ice came from, is actually a direct recording of the industrial age. That 70 feet represents the chemistry that was transported via the atmosphere in the industrial age to Greenland. Other changes, halibut that once swam only in the very southern waters of Greenland now swim here in Disco Bay under this ice, and they also swim much further north. Warming oceans are encouraging plankton and other marine life to atlanticize the biology of the Arctic Ocean, which is very complex and super interesting in many ways. Greenlanders are seeing their own lives change, in some cases very dramatically, because the way the rest of us and the rest of the planet are living. Change is a two-way street. It is commonly said that what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. This ice, for example, is going somewhere downstream, and Maine is downstream. So a little bit more on currents here, the topic of ocean currents in the Northwest Atlantic. Hopefully you can see this, but let's look at two lines here. You see Greenland at the top. There's a thin purple line that goes right along the shores of Greenland. On the east side, that's the East Greenland current. It ducks around the southern tip of Greenland and then goes up the west. The name changes to a West Greenland current. Then it crosses Labrador Bay and becomes the Labrador current. And then it heads south around Newfoundland and Nova Scotia down to the Gulf of Maine. Actually keeps going a little further than it actually does, I think. This purple line is deep. It's a current of cold, salty water. And according to a lot of models, that current's being weakened by meltwater from the Greenland ice sheet and also the melting seasonal sea ice, like that ice we just saw on the previous slide. Also take a look at the red line. That's the Gulf Stream. This is warm surface water. Comes up from the Gulf of Mexico around Florida. And that goes all the way over to Europe. And it also goes north. You can see where the red kind of turns into that peach colored kind of net of lines. That Gulf Stream does go north where it cools, and then it sinks down and actually joins up then the purple line. This is the currents in this part of the Northwest Atlantic. Kind of zooming into where we are in Maine and connecting the currents a little more detail from the new Arctic to the Gulf of Maine. Here's some water temperature data from last summer that a friend sent me. You can see where the Labrador Current brings, again, that purple line comes in around Nova Scotia, brings in that colder blue water from the Arctic, and you can see where the Gulf Stream is bringing in warmer water from the south. Every year, the warmer water current is getting stronger, and the cold water current is getting weaker. You can think of this as kind of like filling up a bathtub with two faucets. When you turn down the cold water and turn up the hot water, the tub warms up. So this is the reason many scientists are hypothesizing that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the global ocean. And that's something we started hearing, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, before the pandemic. And this was kind of my questions and learning and kind of what I had been thinking about when it came to the North when the pandemic hit. And at that point, all my thinking and learning really was in the context of my filmmaking work. When the pandemic hit, Compass Light, we lost pretty much all of our film business overnight. We stopped traveling, not just to the North, but everywhere. And there was, for us, this kind of professional existential question of what next. I kind of knew it was going to come back at some point, but I did kind of, on a personal level, just slow down, took stock. I was entering my 60s. I'd had a good career. I was definitely ready for something new. I was thinking that something hopefully would include my own part of the world. So maybe I could travel a little less. I was also, a little more aware of my carbon burn. I was interested in something that was unpredictable, I guess. And I figured that as long as my basic obligations, to my wife and family were covered, which they were, there was not a lot of stake if I were to fail. So this was a chance to really kind of go for something. And I felt like there's some opportunities to build on what I was already learning in the Northwest Atlantic. So I started planning a boat chart business, and that's how Arctic Earth got going. The name reflected the findings and the type of stories and the experience that I imagined the boat could access. Arctic plus Earth, and these would be stories connecting the Arctic to the rest of the planet. I had hoped that the boat could eventually be part of Compass Light's filmmaking work, but I also knew that film budgets alone would definitely never support a boat. So I approached it with the idea that this business really needed to carry most of its weight with charters, with charter revenue, and that they would be people who were interested in the new Arctic and people for whom the new Arctic mattered. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of launching this enterprise before circling back to some of the findings thus far, which is actually the interesting parts. Early on, I made decisions in 4 areas. Firstly, locations. I chose the Northwest Atlantic because it's an area I know. It includes the place where I live. And I wanted to offer trips to 2 regions that which I was calling Arctic Earth North and Arctic Earth South. North is really, kind of Newfoundland North, maybe Greenland, Baffin Island, and south would be the Gulf of Maine. The yearly plan would be to leave the Gulf of Maine in early May, go north to Greenland or Canada, and then do a series of expeditions. People would come up to the boat and then depart and swap, and then return to Maine in October. I wanted to make some time for early winter offshore trips in Maine because, as we've seen, it seems like November is the new September. It just keeps going later into the season. The opportunity and ability to be on the water here. I figured if I didn't have enough northern charters booked for a given year, I would spend that year south looking at things that had an Arctic connection. So the second decision was to go multi-year. I figured it was a good idea to do this for at least 5 years because not only would that time period attract researchers, many of whom had multi-year projects, but 5 years was also enough time to really deepen the knowledge of the place and the people and the kinds of changes that were happening. And I wanted to kind of experience and witness those changes, directly. Third decision, I'd look for 3 types of charterers: scientists, media makers, colleagues of mine, but also maybe some of our own work eventually. And then this kind of other group that I'm just calling explorers. And those are, all of these actually would be people who were wanting to expedition, but to do so kind of with a purpose. They'd each have their own goals, their own questions, their own motivations. Some might be climate related, but others might not. Last decision, as I got this thing going, was a series of decisions, actually, boat and crew. And since we got a lot of boat folks here, I'm going to take a deeper dive into that right now. I found and purchased a used Good Hope 56. This is a semi-custom boat. It had been hauled out in Grenada in the Caribbean. It was designed as a global expeditioning vessel right here in Maine. Chuck Payne and Ed Joy. Ed Joy was really the principal designer in Camden. Boat was built of aluminum, 1/2-inch aluminum, launched in 2016 in Cape Town, South Africa. It's a cutter with a fractional sailing rig. The mainsail shown here as 3 reefing points. We're currently adding a 4th. Boat sails well. That was super important because a wind-powered vessel was a key element of the plan. Also needed to be strong, and it needed to have simple systems, manual systems as much as possible. I wanted it to have the ability to, make a repair below the waterline. For example, changing propeller when we were far from a boatyard. So this was an argument for a swing keel, which you can kind of see here. It swings up into that keel well above, and a swing rudder, which also kicks up. You can, with the keel and the rudder up, the boat draws 3 feet. And when the keel's down, it draws 9 feet. And it's kind of interesting, actually. When you're in the north, you're like you are here, you're protecting yourself, say, when you're seeking an anchorage from the wind, from the moving water, from currents. And obviously you want to be near, but not too near, rocks and shore. When you go up to where there's ice, you've got this kind of 4th completely fundamental element, fundamental like those other 3. It's hard, like like land, like rocks. Excuse me for a sec. but that ice moves like wind or water. So when you're seeking an anchorage, you want to find a place where there is no ice. And one easy way to do that is to go into a fairly shoal bay where ice can't go because most of the ice is underwater. So you won't get big bergs in a place that say, is 6 feet or 8 feet of depth. So the swing keel, swing rudder was good in a number of ways. And we did test that the first year. This was a place where we just went in, sat upright. It's got kind of a canoe-shaped bottom. Sits nicely. You don't want to do this in gravel or places where there's a lot of rocks and so on. They can get up in the keel well, but worked great. The layout I was looking for, and we end up with here 7 separate compartments from the bow, chain locker, forepeak, forward sleeping cabin, a center cabin and galley, one on either side of the swing keel, the keel well in the center of the boat. The engine room and the aft cabin and lazarette. These aren't quite watertight, but they could be actually without a lot of extra work, which I haven't done, but there's 7 fairly distinct compartments. Also wanted a big cockpit where we could work out of, including dive out of, and wanted an easy step down, sugar scoop type transom. Pilot house that was warm, insulated, 360-degree visibility, a lot of light, simple nav station, and a really good, reliable heater. You can see the stovepipe here in the middle. This is a reflex diesel heater, like a drip heater. Super simple. Big galley where 2 people could work. Forward sleeping cabin with radiator. Some degree of privacy with sleeping curtains, kind of like a train car. And another multi-use mid cabin, which can host watch changes when you're offshore, but also have a single bunk or a workstation that mattress can go up and you can kind of use it as a bench, or even a double berth. And then after the boat, core element is the crew. There are a few really good ice pilots and high latitude skippers out there, and I was super lucky that one of those reached out to me when he heard about this Arctic Earth plan. Magnus Day, he's a Brit. He got his experience as a skipper working 3 or 4 years or maybe more in Antarctica with Skip Novak's pelagic fleet. Magnus has also piloted other vessels with a group called EOS, and altogether, I think now he's over 20 seasons in Antarctica, plus several seasons in Greenland, and 6 months on Arctic Earth, 6 months elsewhere. During our get to know each other delivery from Granada, I learned he's got the character to be really good with groups, cheery almost all the time, even when enforcing the soft luggage rules aboard. The mate is Julia Princelar, is a Canadian. She's married to Magnus. She's been great from the very beginning, right through the full 2022 season in Greenland, and is still on board. Okay, so diving into our trips here. Our first trip was with Paul Majewski, who's an incredibly accomplished ice core researcher and the director of the Climate Change Institute at the University of Maine. He's has many achievements. Among them, he provided oversight and leadership of the GISP-2 ice core drilling in Greenland that happened between 1989 and 1995. where he kind of led 25 U.S. institutions on this really ambitious core ice core drilling, where they went right down 2 miles, I think, to the bedrock. On board Arctic Earth, Paul is interested in studying one of the critical impacts of warming in the Arctic, which is the release of toxic substances, human sourced, that's trapped in glaciers and trapped in the permafrost. The Greenland ice sheet is the largest glacier repository in the northern hemisphere, and that, as I was saying earlier, is a deposit of atmospherically transported products from Europe and elsewhere. So their study was to look at potential health hazards to Greenlanders and to monitor water. And he wanted to set up, at the invitation of the Greenland government and in collaboration with Greenlanders, he wanted to set up a framework for monitoring water quality. And this would be on the West Coast. And you can see here's a series of 5 different areas. The lowest area, Narsarsuaq and Narsaq, the White Stars. And then north of that, Nuuk, Manitsaq, Ilulissat, Upernavik, and Qaanaaq in the far north. It's a 5-year program, and I think it has a lot of merit. Arctic populations, both the humans and the non-human, or more than human, are experiencing the greatest warming on the planet. And in fact, in 2022, this jumped from twice as fast as the rest of the planet to 4 times as fast in certain areas of the Arctic. But neither the warming nor the pollutants that are trapped in the Greenland ice sheet are there because of the Greenlanders' activities. They're on the front lines of climate change, and it's not really because of them. The white lines are the tracks where we went with Paul's team on the first in the first year, in the first trip. This is a series of fjords just west of what is called Cape Farewell at the very southernmost tip of Greenland. If you go kind of to the right or to the east around that tip, after that last village of Upperlatok, there's about 500 miles of unpopulated coastline. And then there's a village, Tasalik, and then there's, 1,800 miles, that whole coast, maybe 6,000 people on the entire east coast of Greenland. It's very remote, and we're hoping to head there next year. I thought maybe I'd break a little bit here, play a 5-minute clip, video clip that I filmed. Hopefully this will play well on your sets. You can get a sense of the boat, the seascape, the landscape. And this was with Paul Majewski and the Climate Change Institute.
We're in the 10th day of a sampling program off Arctic Earth, in which we've been collecting water to look at the chemistry of this water, which changes as a consequence of glacier melt. We've been getting these samples from the open ocean by going up into the fjords, by sampling streams that drain into the fjords, streams that come off glaciers and glacier ice. The purpose of all of this is the Arctic is changing really fast, and we want to find out what those changes are and be able to make better predictions for the future.
We can stop right here. Big ice. That'll clear the barnacles.
Okay, maybe I'll have you up on the bow here. And we're gonna have the tender like come towards you a little bit.
Watch it swinging back into the mast, guys. That's
Yeah.
the...
So I'm gonna try to pull it back towards you, Alex.
I'm going to jump in and start her up, and we'll warm up while we get like.
Go around this way.
Definitely. Well, no, I'd go this way.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll have to go.
So, we all know the Arctic is warming. We all know that it's a consequence of human activity and the increase in greenhouse gases. And in order to do the sort of monitoring, travel over the distances that we have to do to understand what's going on throughout the North Atlantic and the Arctic, we wanted a vessel that was not going to pollute. Certainly a sailboat is the best choice for this. We need to be able to move in and out of very tight inlets. We need a vessel that's strengthened for the type of ice that surrounds us. And we need a vessel that can go long distances without necessarily using a lot of fuel. ArcticEarth is really beautifully set up for this. And in particular, ArcticEarth has a very impressive, highly experienced crew, which is essential to get through environments like this.
So we've got some guys ashore taking water samples, and all of a sudden we've got a breeze sprung out of the north, which is potentially going to pack ice into the little tiny cove they've parked the tender in. So I've called them back to the boat. I think they've done their work anyway, and we're going to reload the tender and get out of here before it becomes too thickly packed for us. Okay, grind, please.
This 10-day trip was really a reconnaissance to find out how much sampling we could get done in 10 days, learn more about the coastal environment. Despite the fact that we've been working in Greenland for many years, this coastal environment is different. Every single one is. We started this trip in Maine, Camden, Maine, and we're interested in not just Maine, but we're interested in the entire region of the northwestern Atlantic, which includes where we are right now, southern and western part of Greenland, right up the entire west coast into Baffin Island and around to Nunavut, and then back, of course, to Maine.
So the preliminary findings from Paul's first year included a higher than normal level of lead in the coastal waters in southwest Greenland. So we'll see how that unfolds in the next few years as we kind of progress up the west coast with his work and north on the west coast. You know, part of the goal here is to establish a baseline. A big issue in Greenland is mining, and there was a lot of effort to dig an open pit uranium mine in the southwest. Paul has looked at the ways that the residue from such a mine can be transported thousands of miles, which he looked at that in the southern hemisphere. Really very small trace amounts can travel huge distances. So he's really motivated to get this done, and it's going to be interesting to see how it goes year to year. He'll be our second expedition next year in Greenland. We closed out our 2022 Arctic Earth North season with 3 other expeditions. He was just down in that southwest. The other 3 were further north. One was a team of explorers and 2 were media makers, including one group of colleagues of mine that were working on an oceans special for Netflix. I think it's coming out next year. And then after that 4 expedition period, the boat went south to Camden for the winter. Before we leave 2022, though, there's a couple of other things that kind of happened just by virtue of being there. When we were in the southwest of Greenland with Paul, we had heard of a hot spring. So we went, and it was incredible. Ice all around, this beautiful warm water. It was just heaven. And I never really thought of Greenland as being having any kind of geothermal activity, but it does, not a ton. We were talking with a commercial dive outfit and a friend in Qaqortoq, a town in the southwest, and I learned about Ika Fjord, which we passed by on the way north. There's relatively little diving in Greenland for obvious reasons, but this fjord has some really intriguing underwater features, and you can see them in this 3D render on the seafloor. There's little, hopefully you can see it in the middle there. There's little spires. We couldn't visit this as we went north in 2022, but Scandinavian researchers have explored Ika Fjord over the last few years, and this is what they found. You can see there's this, it's called the Ika Columns Garden, and it's the only place in the world where you can view tufa columns underwater. And these are, I think out west, there's a lake, Mono Lake, I think is the one, that has tufa columns that you can see it drained, and they're just kind of standing on the plain. But here they're underwater. They're 30 to 80 feet high. They were formed 10,000 years ago. And there's all kinds of life all around them. Bivalves, snails, tunicates, sea anemones. You can see urchins. There are tube worms, encrusting algae. I think it's that purple in the top right. It's really just the kind of place in marine life that you learn about when you're moving and you're kind of in place when you're there with your eyes and ears open. And I'm really hoping to get back to this or get to it really for the first time with diving friends in the future. So that was really our first year, 2022. We wintered and did our 2023 spring refit at Lyman Morse in Camden. They've been excellent. And we really had hopes of making 2023 last summer another North year, but couldn't string together enough expeditions. So in February, late winter last year, we pivoted, and actually in fairly short order, we quickly found some charters who were interested in trips in the south, in the Gulf of Maine. I'll talk about those a little bit. The first one, these were all offshore trips. The first expedition was in June with some media colleagues who were producing a 3-part PBS special on the Gulf of Maine. This is kind of done in conjunction and also featuring the National Geographic still photographer Brian Scarry, underwater photographer. This crew needed a base to work from. The site was Almond Rock, which is 90 miles outside of Portsmouth. And they needed someone who would be out there for 2 weeks. So I thought this sounded interesting and signed on. We were in convoy with the research vessel Connecticut, and we just kind of hung in this place. We waited for the weather before heading out there. But it's not really a rock, almond rock, in the sense that, you know, you think of it as a mariner. This is the summit of a seamount, and it's the very top of that mountain is right below these boats, maybe 30 feet. And then the mountain slopes down 600 feet all around to the plains below. It's been protected from commercial trawling for decades. It's part of a kind of a mountain range called Cassius Ledge. And it's been studied, but not that frequently. One guy, John Whitman from Brown, has been out there quite a bit over a long period of time. But the last trip prior to this one and this filming was 7 years ago. At that point, he recorded 300 times more fish in the waters around Almond Rock than there were in the other study sites closer to the coast. Just huge density of marine life. But a lot's happened in the last 7 years. Waters have warmed. They were really looking at kelp as the kind of key ecosystem element to hold the rest of the life there. And prior to the first dives on this trip, John Whitman, Doug Rasher from Bigelow, and others, they really had big questions, like, would there be less kelp than before, less fish? From Arctic Earth, they weren't diving from Arctic Earth, so we kind of had time during the day to scope around. We saw just a constant parade of humpback whales. A basking shark swam by, went over kind of in the tender, and it just, I could tell I was in a 12-foot tender when I looked down. The sizing of the shark was somewhere around 25 feet. There were a whole range of seabirds. So it was really, really interesting. I'd never seen anything like it in the Gulf of Maine. This point, which is just as you're going across the open ocean, it's just nothing that really says, other than the wildlife, that this is a really unique, distinctive point. For the science team and the media team, their papers and the film and the series is not complete yet, so I can't share their findings, but keep an eye out. After that trip, we had another one. This was also a science expedition, and in the south area of the Gulf of Maine. This was with a group called the Ocean Genome Atlas Project. The expedition chief scientist is Leonid Moroz, who is a Belarusian neuroscientist, currently working out of the University of Florida, has a lab there. He studies unique neural networks in plankton, brains, nervous systems. And they were very interested in testing their approach and their gear in the south this summer, with the idea of going north afterwards. So we went out, we were offshore again, along that little red line. And you can see at one end of the red line, it's in that green area, which is the warmer Gulf Stream influenced waters. And then as you go kind of to the northeast, where the blue is, we're in the colder water. So we kind of were interested in doing both warm and cold water sampling. Here, I'll play a little bit of, this will be about a 7-minute clip that really gives you a flavor of how you could work with a microscope, which is not as challenging as I actually thought it might be, and doing plankton tows, and kind of really what they were looking for on this ocean genome trip. Yeah, what do you got there? Oops, all right. Let me just go back here. Yeah, what do you got there?
Yeah, I have this kind of a lobster larva. I'll photograph this lobster. Yeah, but it's really tiny. Very colorful. So this is a lobster.
Yeah, so we're just a bit southeast of Monhegan Island, so off the coast of Maine. This is our first real deep water plankton tow in the Gulf of Maine for OGAP. We're looking for longitudinal gradients of trying to find similar species in some with similar water temperatures, and to see what maybe the evolutionary or biochemical differences are between those organisms and how they're interacting in their environment. Just the weight of
Oh, it's a nice lobster. See? Baby lobster. Pretty cool, man. So let me get this.
Now,
This is a magic spoon.
Scallop of when
Most important
scallop and when we get the scallop.
instrument in science.
Scallop.
See? So basically we scan for ctenophores, mostly right now coffee pods and sea arrows.
Yeah, but you're past it.
Very
Yeah,
typical.
you let it go.
This is what actually we're looking for. It's a Pleurabrachia
If you
bacchi.
look any closer,
It's not
you
bacchi,
realize we're-
Pileus. See? This is Pleurabrachia pileus. Sister species to famous Pacific Pleurabrachia brachia, this genome sequenced.
I'm just going to stop that right there. I just wanted to make a point about the neural systems that he's looking at. One of the things that interests him is the regenerative qualities. These are creatures, the ctenophores, that are very early down, low on the trunk of the tree of life, kind of really evolved on their own. Leonid feels there, I think he said something like 23 different ways to build a brain across all of the spectrum of life. And these creatures have a really interesting way of doing it. He noticed one of the things is a brain was cut off of one of these ctenophores, and it completely regenerated in 2 days. So he's really looking at plankton and kind of taking a deep dive on that. So they will be joining us next year, 2024, on the route from Camden to Disco Bay, leaving Camden May 1st and arriving in Disco Bay on the west coast of Greenland about 3 weeks later, sampling all the way. 8 other expeditions are already booked for 2024. They're listed here by name or the type of trip. These expeditions are all going to happen either in the Disco Bay area or between Disco Bay and around that south end of Greenland up to Scoresby Sound, which is a little more than halfway up the east coast of Greenland. And yeah, unless someone backs out, we're fully booked. But it looks like we'll be heading further north again in 2025 along the west coast of Greenland, much further north on that west coast, possibly over to Canada before returning south to Maine. We're only partially booked for 2025. So if you know of anyone or you're interested, it's definitely not too early to reach out. Even if you're not a researcher or a media maker with your own goals and motivation, that's plenty. And the booking information is on our website. And also on the website, you can check out back issues of the Arctic Earth Journal, which comes out every 2 or 3 months via email with expedition reports, findings, and really anything connected to the Arctic Earth theme that I find interesting. And you can sign up there to receive future issues too. So I think at that point, I'll stop and try to address any questions you might have.
All right, thank you so much. That was so interesting. There's a lot to take in there, David. Nobody typed a question in the chat. So at this point, if you have a question, do you want to raise your hand if you know how to do that, or just unmute yourself and we'll hope that not everybody asks the question at the same time. And you can do that now. Waiting for questions. Well, I'll start. I have a question. So you have all these expeditions lined up for this year. About how long do you go out for?
Each one's, typically two weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks. I think there's one this coming year that's 3 weeks.
Okay. And so you
it's a long, takes a couple days to get up there to Greenland. So unless you're starting in Maine or ending in Maine, it's a lot of travel time. So then on the boat, but you want to make it worthwhile when you're there.
Yeah, cool. So you start in May and go through November?
We start in May, and we go through till October, really mid-October. It starts to get dark, pretty dark in the north, and it's cold. It's cold all summer. You're wearing long underwear pretty much every day. Anyways.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have a question?
David, when you talk about them finding lead in the ice, is that the lead coming through in the water, in the ocean, or is that from the atmosphere? Or both?
That's from the atmosphere through to the ice, but in some cases it could also just be naturally occurrent from the bedrock where it's exposed. So that's really a preliminary finding. I think they're not really sure if that's going to hold up, and they're not really sure where it came from, but it's likely one of those two areas. Looks like I see what's my role during the trips. A question. Yeah. I'm not the captain. Occasionally I am. I was in Maine for parts of it, but I really want Magnus and Julia to really be running the boat. So they basically are driving the bus. Sometimes we have a second role aside from captain, which we call the expedition leader, and that can be the group that's chartering the boat, or if we're using the boat for compass light work, that would be me. When I am on, and I'm not on, I'm kind of there selectively. Like in this upcoming season, I'll just be on for one trip at the beginning in June and one trip at the end of September. But when I am on, usually it's in the role of filmmaker.
Thanks. There's another question. Do you want me to read it or can you?
Yeah, let's see. What are your navigation charts? And how much fuel water do you carry? So we've got, I think, let's see, we've got paper charts, Danish charts for Greenland, Canadian and British charts for Canada. And we also have, we navigate with Wasilla iSailor on iPads, kind of separate copies of that with satellite connection that the iPad has. We have a Garmin chart plotter, and we'll have I guess it's we just got a new one, so I think that's Navionics, but we haven't used that yet. And for kind of planning and route planning, I'm kind of interested in this TZ Navigator Pro that's out there. That's a PC-based system. I've been researching that. I might add that for this next year. And as far as water and fuel, we do have a water maker. We have 1,000 liters capacity of water, but we can make water at roughly 50 liters an hour, desalinating salt water. And for fuel, we have 2,000-liter tanks, so a total of 2,000 liters of diesel, and then a day tank with another 120 liters. And depending on our speed, really, our consumption varies somewhat. But doing a low, say 4 knots, I think we're up close to 4,000 nautical miles. So we have pretty good range. But the point is, we really try to sail as much as we can. And it was interesting, in the first season, we got up there, sailed up quite a bit. And then once we got in the fjords, found that there wasn't really much wind. The wind would blow. When it did blow, it was either in or out, but oftentimes it really was very, very light. And I got kind of nervous about that because I really didn't want to go up and just be motoring around. That really was not the idea. So we started keeping track how many of our logged miles were wind-powered miles. And it is true in the fjords, it was closer to maybe 50-50. Altogether, when you take into account, the coastal transits outside the fjords where there usually is wind, or of course the big transits back to Maine, at the end of about 4,500 nautical miles, which was our total distance run in that year of 2022, 35% were wind powered. I wish it was more, but that's still a lot better than any other boat up there. But it is, yeah, that was a surprise to me.
You have another
see
question.
here.
How many people are on the boat at one time?
Okay, so we have a Max and Julia crew of 2. They're in the aft cabin, and then we have typically 4 or 5 others. We can have as many as 6 when we're coastal, 6 others for a total of 8. But usually it's the 2 plus 4. So usually 6, I would say 6, sometimes 7 total. That seems to be a good, comfortable number where people aren't really getting too much in each other's way, and yet there's enough people that you can get things done, and it is socially interesting.
Next question, where do people meet you when you're already in the north? How do they get there?
Yeah, that's kind of tricky, actually. So Greenland's a huge place, biggest island on the planet, a lot of coast. not a lot of towns with airports that have any international connectivity. Not a lot of people. There's about 60,000 people that live in Greenland. Maybe 25 miles at the most of paved road there. But you do have you have an international airport in the capital, which is Nuuk on the west coast, about maybe a third of the way up. There's an international airport on the southwest that Americans built in the 40s, part of the war, in a town called Narsarsuaq. And then there are seasonal international flights that go in and out of Ilulissat, which is up in Disco Bay on the west coast also. So those are kind of the three main airports. There's a lot of smaller airports, not a lot. There's some smaller airports, and there are heliports for helicopters. The routing, if you're going to Greenland from the United States, it's through Iceland. There are no direct flights right now. They're working on it, but they haven't arrived yet. So you can leave Boston. Usually you go to Keflavik Airport, Reykjavik in Iceland, spend the night, change from that international airport to the domestic airport in Reykjavik, and then fly to one of those airports I just mentioned. So it's an overnight, it's a two days to get there, but usually coming back to Boston, you can do that in one day.
Next question, how many other boats were you seeing?
Oh, and I should answer, I forgot to answer the other part of that, which is
okay.
we meet people either in these places where there are airports, or they take a smaller boat from the airport area to another place where the boat might be. Sometimes the airports are way up in a fjord that we don't want to go all the way up in. It can be 90 miles long. So we'll meet people, relatively near airports, but not always right at the airport as they leave or join the boat. Okay, sorry.
So the question is, how
I
many
missed
other
that one,
boats?
Brenda.
How many other boats were you seeing, and what sorts of things? There's two questions coming up. How many other boats were you seeing?
How many boats? Well, there's the coastal Royal Arctic vessels. They're kind of big red freighter types. Occasionally you'll see those, once every maybe couple weeks or so, 10 days. They're not many boats. Really, most days you don't see boats. And occasionally you'll see small kind of outboards. People really love fishing for halibut. It's become very popular, and a lot of small boats will just go out. They'll have a little kind of like a lobster type hauler, but they'll use it to haul these halibut up. So you do see occasional small boats that are halibut fishing. And then, every once in a while, especially when you're near Nuuk or one of the other, larger villages, you'll see the offshore fishing boats that are bigger and basically look like the offshore fishing boats you see in Canada or, Portland.
Okay, the next question is, what sort of things are the media tour people doing? The person suggested probably documentaries, I presume. But
Yeah. Let's see. It's a range. There'll be one fellow next summer who's on for 2.5 weeks, and he's very interested in landscapes, and particularly the plan view, looking kind of straight down. So he'll be doing aerials with drones, high resolution drones, to get what he's working on. The Netflix group that we were with on 2022 in Disco Bay, they were also doing drone aerial work. And let's see, we do have a photo workshop. The first one will be next year. That's 10 days with Allison Langley. the nautical photographer from Camden. Probably a lot of you know. So she's going to take a group of 4, and they're going to really focus on, and they're going to do still photography, and it's going to be looking at the native craft, maybe kayaks, in Disco Bay.
It's cool.
We're hoping, as I'm kind of filming and looking at stories I see there, I'm hoping to have, we'll be doing some of our own work in this research area that I showed you.
Okay. Another question, do you plan on
We
sailing?
plan on sailing in the fjords on Baffin East Coast next year if the pack ice lets you. We're not going to be on Baffin next year. We're going to be on the east coast of Greenland. And there's a lot of ice over there, especially early in the summer. But we're going to be timing it, hopefully, to get over there after that ice leaves, which will be in August.
Well, thank you for answering those. Anybody else have another question? No. Don't see.
Oops.
They're very quiet. Mickey, do you have something?
Hang on a second here. I think I missed your.
I don't have a question about the Arctic Earth. I'm now curious about how your Curtis Island lighthouse fared during the storms.
I lost audio. Can you hear me, Brenda?
Yeah, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? No. Uh-oh. He can't hear us. I don't know what happened.
Not sure. I'm not able to hear anything on my end here. Sorry. Just see what's going on here. What happened?
No, I've already.
Not sure what happened here.
Okay, I'm
I
sorry.
can't hear.
Huh, that's too bad.
But if you can hear me, okay, I see that in the chat. All right, well, if you've got other questions, I guess type them in. I'm not sure how we're doing time-wise, Brenda.
Well, close to wrap up.
Oh, can you see the last question about water tests? No. Let's see here. Maybe I'll go back.
If somebody raises a hand.
What are the water tests that you did on the earlier expedition? They were just essentially collecting little, bottles of fresh water, salt water. Would be up in the streams, on the rivers, in the fjords and offshore. And then they would be looking for a whole range of, chemicals in that, including PFAS, including plastics, but also lead and a whole range of nutrients. They've got some pretty sophisticated equipment to read through this at the University of Maine. Dave, we can wrap up. Okay. Thank you very much for having me. Enjoy this, and good luck with come boating in your next talk, and have a good winter.
Hi, David.
Hi, David.
Thank you.
Well, once again, Brenda,